Hi, my name's Avery. I raised my sister's 3 kids like they were my own because she left and never looked back. For 15 years, I fed them, cried with them, kept them safe. Then, out of nowhere, she showed up with lawyers and called me a kidnapper. She called me nanny trash in front of strangers. But what she didn't expect was what I had saved in a moss green briefcase. They say the loudest betrayals are whispered. Mine started in the quiet hum of a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where nothing seems wrong, until everything is. My name's Avery. I was the youngest daughter, the invisible one, not unloved, just unnoticed, always the helper, never the priority. Growing up, I was the one setting the table, watching the cousins, making sure Mom didn't forget her keys. Rowan, my older sister, was the star. She had the fire, the charm, the attention. I had steadiness. People love that about you until they need more, and you're already too tired to say no. It's taken me years to untangle what really happened and why. But I'm ready now. Rowan didn't call that day. She just showed up. Her car was still running when she rang the bell, one toddler on her hip and another clutching her leg. No hi, no can I? Just keep them for a while, okay? Like she was dropping off dry cleaning. I was 30, single, working 2 jobs, barely making rent. But I nodded. Of course I did. Because deep down, I still thought that maybe, just maybe, being needed would finally mean being valued. I took the diaper bag. I took their tiny hands. I took it all in stride. And just like that, my life stopped being mine. Rowan vanished back into her world of wine nights and yoga retreats, texting now and then. Thanks, you're a lifesaver. And everyone else? They praised her. So brave, they'd say, handling so much. No one asked where the kids were sleeping. No one noticed my canceled interviews, the empty coffee cups lining my sink from all-nighters with fevers and teething. I didn't complain. I wanted to be strong. I thought strength meant silence. Until one night, when I passed by her front porch, picking up a spare toy the kids had left behind during a rare visit. She didn't see me, too busy laughing on the phone. She's just nanny trash, she said. It was casual, thoughtless, like a bad joke that didn't need an audience. I froze. Something in me cracked right then. Not loud, but clean, like dry wood under pressure. I stood in the dark for a long while, holding that toy, wondering if I had misunderstood. But I hadn't. That label didn't come out of nowhere. It had roots. Years of being the one who helps, the one who's flexible, the one who won't mind. It had been planted long before those kids ever arrived. When Rowan started seeing Peter, a wealthy tech guy with a Tesla and a house that echoed, she told me flat out, "Please don't make things weird. I told him I had help for a bit, but let's keep things clean. Don't ruin the image." I didn't argue. But I started saving everything. Texts, voicemails, birthday cards signed "Love Auntie Avery," like I was the fun sidekick, not the full-time caregiver. I wasn't collecting ammo. Not then. I was just trying not to disappear. Then came the dinner. She invited me to one of her big showcase nights. Peter's friends. The network. The kind of party with too much brie and not enough chairs. I came in a plain dress, trying not to look like I'd changed 3 diapers that morning and cried in the car before walking in. She was radiant, confident, and then she said it, stood there and introduced the kids to a new couple. These two? Oh, I raised them solo. Long story, but worth it. My jaw tightened. I waited for her to correct it, laugh, say something like, "Well, my sister helped a ton, of course." But nothing came. And then my uncle, tipsy and loose-lipped, leaned over and whispered, "Rowan told us you were just the sitter. Wild, huh?" I didn't make a scene. I excused myself, walked to the guest bathroom, and sat on the edge of a cold bathtub for 20 silent minutes. Not crying. Not yet. Just empty. When I came back out, she smiled across the room like we were in on the same secret. That's when love started to rot. Not all at once, but the edges curled. Later that week, after putting the kids to bed, I stood in my kitchen and stared at the fridge. I was exhausted in a way no sleep could fix. I opened a drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. Come get your children, I wrote. That's all, no guilt trip, no threats. Just truth. I didn't send it. I folded it into a maple leaf, the way we used to in fall as kids. Our backyard was full of them. We'd press them into books, pretend they were currency in some game I barely remember. I placed the folded note in my bedside drawer. Somewhere deep down, I still thought she'd do the right thing. That family, even broken ones, knew when enough was enough. But sometimes, the letter you never send becomes the one they use against you. At first, I kept telling myself it was just temporary, one weekend, then another. Then she'd come get them once she figured out her work situation. I waited quietly, giving Rowan the benefit of every doubt she didn't earn. But time moved. Months turned into a year, and somewhere in that blur, I stopped checking the calendar. It hit me on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in the school pickup line. The teacher leaned in through my window and smiled. "Hey, Mom! Finn forgot his lunchbox." I nodded, said thanks, but the word, it clung to me. Mom. Not because it wasn't true, but because no one, not the school, not the neighbors, not even Rowan, had ever corrected it. I looked at my phone later that night. There were 2 unread texts from her. "All good?" "Sorry, can't talk, in a meeting." That was it. That was always it. One-liners, like I was a distant cousin doing her a favor. I told myself she needed space, that maybe she was trying to rebuild. But deep down, something colder was growing, not resentment, yet just a dull hum of realization. This wasn't temporary, and it hadn't been for a long time. It was during a regular Tuesday dinner, chicken nuggets, green beans, Finn spilling juice for the 3rd time, when it happened. "Mom, can I have more ketchup?" I didn't flinch, not on the outside, but something in me curled in on itself. He didn't notice. He kept eating, swinging his legs like nothing had shifted, and I didn't correct him. I wanted to. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and dialed Rowan. She answered on the 3rd ring, breathless, like she'd been laughing. "What?" she asked, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "They're starting to call me Mom," I said, voice low. "Yeah? Well, you're the one there every day. Why wouldn't they?" I waited for more. A thank you, an apology, a promise. Anything. Instead, she added, "Is this going to be a whole thing now? You're not making this harder than it needs to be, are you?" I hung up, not out of anger, but clarity. She wasn't coming back. Not really. She'd offloaded them. Offloaded motherhood. And me, I was the catch basin she'd dumped it all into. I started documenting things then, not like before. Now it was folders, labels, time-stamped emails to myself, just in case, just so I wouldn't get lost in her mess again. The knock came one Friday morning. I had a laundry basket in one hand and a toothbrush in the other. The kids were watching cartoons. "Child Welfare Services, routine check." My stomach dropped. I let them in, stammering. Nobody said, "Rowan didn't tell me." They walked through the house with notepads and polite nods. I followed them like a shadow. Then came the question, "Are you their legal guardian?" I blinked. I take care of them, but I don't have paperwork." One of them flipped open a manila file. "Their school registration lists this address, signed by their mother, that you're their guardian." I sat down hard. She'd used my address. She'd filled out forms. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't know. I'm just trying to help. They gave me options. Ugly ones. Either they report the gap, or I sign a temporary affidavit saying I assumed guardianship knowingly. For the kids' safety, I signed. And that night, I bought a fireproof box and started sorting everything. Medical records, school forms, birthday cards. I wasn't a mother, but the state thought I was. And Rowan? She hadn't called in 6 days. Time moved differently after that. Slower, sharper. Friends stopped calling. "You're always tied up with the kids," they'd say. My cousin stopped inviting me to her wine nights. "I figured you couldn't get away." When I tried explaining, they just shrugged. "Well, you said yes." And they were right. I had said yes. Not to motherhood, but to being invisible. My world shrank to pickups, bedtime stories, reheated pasta, and one-sided conversations. The only person who still called me Avery was the grocery store cashier, and even she started saying ma'am more often. Some nights I whispered my own name just to hear it out loud. And then one evening the kids were asleep and I was folding laundry, socks, the tiny kind you lose in pairs, and I sat down with a piece of lined notebook paper. Not to write to Rowan, to myself. It poured out, fast and sharp. I wrote about the hours no one saw, the holidays missed, the bills paid in silence. I wrote about waking up to cries I didn't birth and going to bed to silence I never asked for. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I wanted clarity. At the bottom, I wrote one line that scared me. You're raising her children, but who's raising you? I folded the letter and slipped it behind a photo frame on my dresser. It stayed there for years. Until the day it became the key evidence in court. I woke that morning with a cake half out of the oven and a kitchen full of balloons, though the balloons felt hollow. It was Gideon's birthday, the youngest. Rowan said she'd fly in. I promise, she'd said weeks ago. I warmed leftover pancakes and iced the cake with shaky hands. The kids watched cartoons, giggling. Rowan didn't come. No call, no text. I told them she must have gotten delayed. But as I carried the small cake into the living room, my voice cracked. Inside, I was boiling, hurting. That night, I saw her Facebook post, her and Peter clinking glasses at a fancy wine tasting in Napa Valley. Everyone liked it. Everyone commented inspo or strong single mom. I let the phone slip from my fingers. Quietly, I walked to the fridge and pulled down Rowan's photo. I pressed my lips between teeth and carefully removed it. Then I dropped it into the trash. Something inside clicked. A week later, I sat in that tiny room at school, waiting for Finn's parent-teacher conference. The counselor asked about his drawings, dark houses, storm clouds, and a small figure hidden behind a window. She said, "He's angry, Avery. He's asking where his mom is. Can you help him?" The words dripped like acid. I felt my throat tighten. They'd listed me as housekeeper on the school form. Not guardian, not aunt, just someone on the payroll. No correction on Rowan's part. I fought not to tremble. That night after dinner, I waited until the kids were asleep and sat between them in their room. Lana wrapped her arm around me. Gideon yawned and said, "You're the one who's always here, Mom." I paused, heart pounding, and said, "I will always be here." I didn't say, "I'm not your real mom." I didn't need to. I just sat there as they drifted off, my resolve hardening. Then the letter came. Not mine. Addressed to Rowan. Urgent. Child benefits adjustment. My fingers stung from folding it back up. Rowan had been taking child support while I made sure they got to school on time and paid their medical co-payments and tucked them in each night. I sat at my desk, head in hands, trying not to scream. It was theft, not of money, but of years, my labor, my love. I opened my journal later, candlelight flickering. I wrote what I couldn't say aloud. The lines blurred with tears I didn't mean to shed. "This is their truth, if no one else speaks theirs," I scribbled fiercely. I backed up every page, locked the file on my computer, hid a copy in a folder in the closet. I was no longer waiting to be seen. I was preparing to be heard. And I didn't know then that one of those entries, word for word, would be read aloud in court someday. But at that moment, it felt like the only way to save myself. The studio lights were hotter than I expected. I sat off to the side, just behind the cameras, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee. They were filming a community segment on resilient single parents. Rowan's idea, I guess. She looked polished, radiant even, like she hadn't missed a night of sleep in years. Hair done, blazer crisp, voice poised. I watched her on that stage, talking about sacrifice, love, late nights with sick kids. They introduced her as a hero mother of 3. Not 2, 3. The host leaned in, all admiration and praise. I waited. Maybe they'd mention me. A photo? A thank you? A single line in the credits? Nothing. The subtitles rolled. Rowan James raised 3 children on her own. I couldn't breathe. I sat in that folding chair, stomach tight, and swallowed every syllable I wanted to scream. My hand stayed clasped in my lap the whole time. After the taping, we drove home in silence. The kids were half asleep in the back seat, heads leaning together. I parked, walked around the car to get them out. That's when I noticed Gideon clutching something in his fist. "What's that?" I asked gently. He opened his hand, small, rusty key. I followed him to the hallway closet. He knelt down, reached behind a stack of old board games, and pulled out a metal box. Inside were old photos, me pushing them on tricycles, reading them bedtime stories, bandaging knees. I didn't even know those photos existed. Gideon held one up. "Was this Mom? Or was this you?" The breath caught in my chest. I knelt beside him. "That was always me, baby." He didn't say anything. He just nodded and tucked the photo in his pocket like it meant something. A few days later, Lana was rummaging through the storage bins in the attic. I'd warned her about spiders, but she was hunting for a toy she swore was in there. Instead, she came down with a faded shoebox full of snapshots and crayon drawings. She pulled out a torn corner of a photo, just enough to see me holding her at the county fair, both of us laughing on a carousel horse. "I remember this," she said quietly. "Grandma said, 'You stayed when Mommy couldn't.'" Her voice cracked on that last word. I held her, my arms tight around her thin shoulders. We didn't talk. We just stood there while dust motes floated in the slanted attic light. Later that night, I stood in the bathroom, door locked, staring at the mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back, the lines, the fatigue, the silence I'd accepted. I thought of the interview, of Gideon, of Lana, of the way my name had vanished from their story, even as my fingerprints were all over their lives. I was tired, but not broken. I breathed in and whispered, "I'm not invisible." That week, I started scanning photos, organizing files, dating drawings, screenshotting texts. Not out of spite, just insurance. I wasn't going to let silence steal what I'd built anymore. The kids felt it, that shift. Lana held my hand longer at the bus stop. Finn hugged me tighter before bed. Gideon started sleeping through the night again, and I didn't know then that what I was about to do next would tip the scales, for good or for worse. I hadn't seen Rowan in nearly a year when she pulled into the driveway, like nothing had changed. The kids were playing with sidewalk chalk. I was folding laundry near the screen door when I heard the car door slam. She stepped out wearing sunglasses, holding garment bags and shopping bags, new clothes for the kids, all with tags. "I'm only in town for a couple days," she said casually. "Need some updated family photos. It's for work, promotion stuff." I didn't answer, just nodded. The kids froze, confused. Gideon ran to her first, hesitant. Lana hung back. Finn stood beside me, stiff. Rowan acted like it was a reunion, like she'd just been gone a weekend. She changed the kids' outfits in the living room, brushing their hair like she knew what she was doing. I stayed quiet, my jaw clenched every time she posed them for the camera like props. When she left that afternoon, she kissed their foreheads, not bothering to look at me. That night, the photos were online. Caption: "Built from the ashes, reclaimed everything, warrior mom." Comments flooded in, hearts, applause, "So proud of you." Not one word about who actually raised those kids. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Then I closed the laptop, got up, and deleted every photo of Rowan still hanging in the hallway. The next morning, I waited until the kids were at school. She was still in the guest room, scrolling her phone with a mug of untouched coffee beside her. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. Rowan looked up, raised an eyebrow. "You're gonna lecture me?" "You don't get to cherry-pick what motherhood looks like," I said, trying to stay even. "You don't get to show up, smile for the camera, and vanish again while I deal with everything else." She laughed, cold, dismissive. "You've always been dramatic. You're just the nanny who forgot her place." My spine stiffened. I kept my voice low. "If you keep this up, I'll take legal steps to protect them." To protect myself. She leaned back, smiling. "You think any judge is gonna side with a broke babysitter over their biological mother?" That hit like a slap. And just like that, I knew we weren't playing pretend anymore. This wasn't about parenting. It was about power. She'd drawn the line. And now I had to decide what side of it I stood on. I made an appointment with a lawyer the following week. Sat there, Knees bouncing, hands cold. I explained everything: how long the kids had lived with me, her absences, the records I'd kept. He nodded, listened, flipped through my folders. No legal guardianship means no legal rights, he said. But what you're doing now, that's smart. Build your case. That night, I stayed up labeling receipts, copying medical forms, printing emails. Not because I wanted to fight, because I knew I had to. By the next weekend, the air in the house had changed. Finn lingered near the kitchen doorway while I was on a call with the lawyer. "Are you and Mom gonna fight?" he asked, barely above a whisper. I knelt down. "I hope not. But sometimes adults have to do hard things to protect people they love." He nodded, not asking more. Lana started asking if I'd stay home even when they grew up. Gideon crawled into my bed after a nightmare and stayed curled against my side until morning. I didn't talk badly about Rowan, but I did start telling them the truth in small pieces. Love doesn't lie, I told them one night at dinner, and truth doesn't need to shout. They were too young to understand the weight of it, but they nodded anyway. Sunday came. I'd just set the table: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, comfort food. The doorbell rang. Rowan again. She walked in like she owned the place, brought toys, dessert, sat at the table like nothing was wrong. The kids were excited but cautious. They watched me carefully. I smiled, passed the gravy. We all ate. After dinner, she stood near the door, gathering her purse. I followed her out quietly to avoid the kids hearing. Before stepping into her car, she leaned close. Her voice dropped low. "You try anything legal, and I'll bury you." I didn't flinch. When the door clicked shut behind her, I walked to the office, sat at the desk, and printed my first affidavit. That night, I finally knew. I was done being polite. I sat across from the family lawyer in that small, sterile office. My hands were folded in my lap, the edges of the paper folders pressing into my palms. Inside were receipts, doctor bills, school forms, old report cards, all things I'd collected over the years, piecing together proof of what I already knew in my bones. The lawyer flipped through each paper, her eyes focusing as she scanned the details of Rowan's absence, the bills I paid, the nights I stayed up when the kids were sick. Then she said it. "These are strong signs of de facto guardianship." My heart thundered in my chest, confusion and relief crashing together so loud my ears rang. For a moment, I wondered if this was a mistake. But when she continued, telling me there was a path to being recognized officially, if I filed affidavits, secured notarized statements, gathered witness testimony, I felt a wave of clarity. I nodded before I even thought. It wasn't a victory yet, but it felt like seeing daylight after years of standing in a dark room. The next morning, I was at the school hallway, canvassing for witness statements. Teacher Rowena Blake approached, hesitant. She'd seen the after-school chaos, the push for Finn to recover. She'd seen me in the school office, advocating, defending. Eyes down, she pushed a note into my hand. "I'll sign," she said quietly. I almost didn't, scared for my job, but I can't stay silent anymore. I gripped her hand, stunned by the weight of that moment. Someone else saw me, not as the sister, not as the help, but as the one doing the job. That acknowledgement settled something hard in my chest. That night, at the dining table, I spread everything out: the photos, the bills, notes I had made in notebooks tucked away in the attic. I labeled each one: April 2005, doctor visit, paid by Avery. June 2005, school fee, paid by Avery. My hands still shook. The TV was on, Rowan's face smiling back at me in an interview. "Heroes with no proof," she'd said, waving her hand like it was obvious. I turned it off, exhaled, and kept sorting. The silence in the house felt different, charged, like waiting for a verdict. In the morning light, Finn came into the kitchen. He leaned his small frame into mine and said, "Mama, you're really our mom, right?" I pulled Lana and Gideon close in a tight hug. "Always," I whispered. Their eyes were clearer, as if they saw me in a new light. Not just the caregiver in the background, but the one who stood for them even when nobody else did. Later, I was in the courthouse library. The clerk slid a file across the table to me. Public records of child support checks addressed to Rowan. My breath caught. I stared as the pages flipped, checks cashed every month, while the costs of school lunches, summer camp registrations, and extra socks for the little ones had come from my account. I closed the file, chest tight, and a single truth echoed in my head. She profited off my love. I was inches from calling my lawyer, hands trembling. Then, I saw a newspaper lying next to the clipboard. Headline in bold letters, "Caregiver sues for kidnapping." My skin crawled. I folded the newspaper carefully, both terrified and oddly proud. I had so much more than love. I had proof. The hallway outside the courtroom was colder than it had any right to be. I'd just stepped out from a preliminary hearing, and before I could take a breath, a reporter cut through the quiet with, "Are you still just the babysitter?" It landed like a slap. Not the words, I'd heard worse, but the tone. Like that question was supposed to be rhetorical. Like my name, my years, my sacrifices could be boiled down to that label. Babysitter. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the reflection in the glass door beside me, my own face looking back, tired, steady, worn in the way people get when they've carried too much for too long. I turned back to the reporter. "No," I said, low but clear. "I'm the reason those kids are still standing." Then I walked back inside, spine straight, hands clenched so tight the skin stretched white. It wasn't about what they called me. It was about what I chose to believe. Later that evening, I was folding laundry with the radio humming in the background. Some local show, familiar voices, small-town gossip. I almost missed it at first, until I heard my name. "Well, let's be honest," a caller said, laughing. "She wasn't even the legal guardian. Why was she raising 3 kids like that?" The host chuckled too, tried to add balance, but the damage was done. My heart beat in my throat. I sat there frozen, socks in my lap, as they dissected my life like I was a segment on some entertainment program. They didn't know my name, but they knew enough to dismiss me. That night, I stood at the window, arms crossed, staring at the glow of the street lamp outside. Something cracked inside me. Not a breakdown, not tears, but something colder, sharper. I whispered, "This is my life, my fight." And I meant it more than I ever had before. The next day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Just a plain envelope with no return address. I opened it on the kitchen counter, coffee half poured. Inside was a typed statement from Jerry, Bart's older brother. He wrote, "I didn't know if it would help, but I saved a voicemail Rowan left me once." I pulled out the cassette tape he'd enclosed. Yes, cassette. Jerry's old school like that. I had to dig through the junk drawer for the one tape player we kept from Gideon's science fair project. I clicked play. Rowan's voice, slightly slurred, fast, familiar, filled the kitchen. "I know I haven't been around, but Avery, God, I depend on her more than I care to admit. Don't tell her I said that." I stopped the tape. Sat down. My hands shook, but not from fear. From knowing. That line, that one admission, was more than just words. It shattered the wall she'd built in public. She called me invisible. But here was her voice, giving me back my name. The next morning, I didn't slouch at drop-off. I didn't sneak glances around to see who might be whispering. I stood tall. Lana held my hand, her small fingers wrapped tight. "One day," I said to her, "they'll know the truth." She looked up at me, brow furrowed. "You mean about you?" I smiled and brushed her hair behind her ear. "Yeah, about us." And as we walked toward the school, I knew something had shifted. Not outside, in courtrooms or newsrooms, but inside me. And I knew then that I couldn't stop. The truth was unstoppable now. The courthouse felt colder than usual that morning. I clutched the moss-green briefcase close to my side, not just a bag now, but a witness to years. Every scrape on its corners, every dent from being tossed aside, felt like a chapter of my story. And today, it came with me not as baggage, but as armor. The judge called the room to order. I sat down beside my lawyer, My fingers curled tightly around the briefcase's handle. There wasn't a tremble in me, just stillness, readiness. One by one, the documents were laid out. Statements from teachers, receipts, letters, the voicemail, each one a thread in a web of truth I had been quietly weaving for over a decade. And then Finn stood up, without being prompted. He walked slowly to the judge's bench, holding the briefcase like it held the last puzzle piece. "This," he said, voice shaking just enough to sting, "this was always ours. She kept everything in here, school drawings, Mom's notes. It helped me make sense of my world." The silence that followed was thick. I heard a gasp. Rowan shifted in her seat, trying to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand. "That's enough, Mrs. Rowan," he said gently. My chest rose slowly. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. But something in me let go. Maybe fear. Rowan stood, lips pursed tight, her voice suddenly sharp. "I never meant to disappear," she said, but her tone betrayed her. She wasn't sure anymore. The judge watched her with the kind of quiet that makes people unravel. Rowena spoke next, followed by the school nurse. Even a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in 3 years stepped up. Each of them described what they saw, who raised the kids, who showed up, who disappeared. Rowan sat back down, eyes wide and jaw clenched. And still, I said nothing. The judge turned toward me. "Ms. Avery, do you accept full guardianship?" I looked at my children. Their eyes met mine. Hope wasn't loud. It was steady. I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Rowan's shoulders sagged. The judge signed the ruling, and it felt less like a victory and more like a release. Outside the courthouse, sunlight hit my face like I hadn't seen it in years. The cameras buzzed, microphones shoved toward me, but I didn't speak. I only reached for my children's hands. Gideon leaned into me. Lana clutched my shirt. Finn stood on my other side like he'd grown a foot taller in one morning. I glanced back once, at the building, at the stairs, and I held the briefcase a little tighter. "We go home now," I said. Just that. That night there was no champagne, no party, just cereal boxes on the table, kids' laughter bouncing off kitchen walls, and the hum of a dishwasher. The briefcase sat open on the table, stacks of papers neatly arranged, each telling a part of the truth. I poured coffee, watching the steam rise, the morning slow and golden. In the window, my reflection stared back. Same tired eyes. But this time, I saw someone who'd stood up. I whispered, more to myself than anyone, "I'm someone who didn't quit. That's enough." And even as I said it, I knew tomorrow they'd try to write me as either a saint or a villain. But tonight I was just home. The first morning after it was all over, I didn't wake up with a start. No dreams, no court prep waiting for me, no dread settling behind my ribs. Just the soft tick of the kitchen clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, and the faint sound of birds outside the window. I brewed coffee slow, letting the smell fill the house. The kids were still asleep upstairs, probably tangled in their blankets, unaware of how different this day was. No hearings, no meetings, just life. Their laughter from last night echoed in my mind. Finn teasing Gideon, Lana chasing them both around the couch. That sound, it didn't come with an asterisk anymore. It was ours, fully. I pulled the court papers from the drawer one last time. Each page had been a war front, each signature a step out of the shadows. I stacked them neatly, slid them into the moss-green briefcase. Then I carried it upstairs and tucked it into the attic behind a box of old Halloween costumes. It wasn't hiding. It was letting go. Back at the kitchen table, I opened a notebook, not a legal pad, just a plain-lined page. I wrote the date, and then I began the letter I'd always meant to write. To my beloved 3, Finn, Lana, and Gideon, I know life gave you questions I didn't always have answers for. I know I wasn't the beginning of your story, but I fought like hell to be part of its heart. There were days I failed, nights I wanted to run, moments I wondered if I was just a stand-in, but then you'd call me Mama or fall asleep in my arms, and I knew I belonged. You didn't owe me love, but you gave it anyway. Thank you for letting me grow with you, not away from you. For trusting me with your scraped knees, your awkward questions, your birthdays and heartbreaks. I can't promise I'll be perfect, But I will always be honest. I will always be loyal. I will always choose you. Blood is a bond. But love is a choice. And I choose you. Every single day. Family isn't about whose blood you carry. It's about who stays and stands by you. I signed it, folded it, slid it into an envelope with each of their names written on the front. I didn't know when I'd give it to them. Maybe I already had, in a way. By midweek, the town papers caught up with the court ruling. Some ran headlines like, "Mother by love, not law," and others clung to the drama. I got calls, questions, invitations to speak. I said yes to one radio segment. Just one. I didn't defend myself. I didn't rehash the trial. I just talked about what it means to raise someone. The invisible things. The forgotten things. The daily, bone-tired, heart-deep things. After that, I stopped talking about it. At the grocery store, people started calling me Ms. Avery with something different in their voice. Less suspicion, more respect. One woman, older than me by decades, touched my arm and said, "You did what every real mother would." I didn't smile. But I felt it, like warmth rising in my chest. That Saturday, Lana came home with a letter of acceptance to community college. I hugged her so hard she squeaked. Finn and Gideon built a fire pit out back, said it was time we had a real barbecue like other families. They invited neighbors. Even Bart came by, handed me a tongs like it was some sacred passing of the torch. Later that night, the kids surprised me with a cake. "Best mom ever," written in crooked, runny red icing. I cried, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. I felt like maybe we weren't surviving anymore. We were living. A month passed, then two. The world kept turning, as it always does. But something in me stayed still, in the best way. I started writing part-time for the local paper. Small stuff, parenting tips, essays on resilience, reflections on what it means to be a single mother in a world that still doesn't know where to file us. My last piece ended like this. They said I was just the babysitter. They were wrong. I was the home. And now I sit on my front porch most evenings, cup of tea in hand. The kids argue about who gets the last hot dog. The sky turns gold, then blue, then that in-between shade where everything feels quiet. I don't feel triumphant. I feel real. And just when I thought the story was done, a letter arrived. Postmarked in Rowan's name.